Okay, I'll just inform everybody, including members and those in the public gallery, that all electronic devices, with the exception of the committee tablet devices, must be switched off completely while the committee is in session, as they interfere with transmission and recording of proceedings. And members asked to ensure that their tablets are switched to mute. We seek agreement of the committee that item 6 be recorded by Hansard. Agreed? Okay. We'll then proceed through the agenda. First of all, in terms of apologies, I'll ask Cian.
Chairperson and Deputy Chairperson and Ian McRae. Chair.
Are we aware of any other apologies? Okay. Move then at item 2, which is the draft minutes of proceedings of the 11th of March, and refer members to the draft minutes at pages 5 to 10 of their packs. Members content that the draft minutes are an accurate record of proceedings? Okay. The minutes will then be published on the website. Matters arising. There's a table of requests for information from DFP. There's a summary of requests at page 12 to 14 for noting. This provides an update on matters arising which are not covered elsewhere on the agenda. I don't know if Shane has anything to say.
Nothing, just as noted, Chair, on the table.
Okay, we'll move on then to item 4, which is the corporation tax bill from Assembly Research. We've been allocated half an hour for this law. As I said, we're running a little bit late. There's the research papers at page 16 of our paper. And I'd welcome then the following witnesses. Michael Scholes, no relation to Paul?
No.
Okay.
No.
And Conal O'Hare, who's a bursary student. And I suppose, obviously we'll hand over to yourselves in a moment, but also I suppose I presume members are happy then for the research paper also to be sent to DFP for response to the issues raised. And I don't know, Michael, are you going to lead off?
Yes, I'll kick off. So, thank you, Chair. I'm just going to start off with some opening comments and then discuss how the format of the presentation will take. Devolving corporation tax to Northern Ireland is to assist in rebalancing Northern Ireland's economy. This overarching aim is to be achieved by the Assembly setting a lower corporation tax rate for certain businesses, which presumably will benefit those businesses increasing their profits. It is assumed that this will make Northern Ireland a more attractive investment location, incentivising companies to invest for the first time in Northern Ireland, or to invest further. Generating such economic activity is expected to genuinely expand Northern Ireland's private sector, thereby helping to rebalance the economy. Yesterday, the Corporation Tax Northern Ireland Bill completed the third reading in the House of Lords. If enacted, amongst other things, the current bill will empower the Assembly to set a Northern Ireland corporation tax rate on specified trading profits, distinct from the UK rate. So the format of the presentation will be as follows. Firstly, Conal will set out the context in which the legislative proposals have been made. He will then explain the key bill provisions. I will then outline the key considerations arising from the bill in terms of anticipated future investment, block grant reductions, cost implications and potential impact on involved administrations. Throughout both presentations, we'll be using scrutiny points, which we've highlighted throughout the paper in block, and really just to emphasise our points. So what we're going to do is Conal's going to do his presentation first, and then at the end of that he'll be free to take any questions, and then whenever I'll then do my presentation and take questions at the end of that, if that's okay, Chair. So I'll hand you over to Conal.
Good morning, Chair. Just my section will go through current UK corporation tax legislation to give a bit of context. We'll go through some of the key political, economic and budgetary developments that have arisen since this issue became one for the consideration of the Assembly. And we'll also present a bit of a user's guide to the key provisions at a very high level, the basic definitions and the key concepts contained within the bill. So, as Michael said, the bill was introduced in the Commons on the 8th of January. The proposals will allow the Northern Ireland Executive and the Northern Ireland Assembly to set a different rate of corporation tax from the rest of the United Kingdom for most types of trading profits arising here in Northern Ireland. The tax base, including reliefs and exemptions, will remain under control of the UK Government. The earliest financial year for which Northern Ireland could potentially set its own rate will be 2017. This will allow time for businesses, agents and this body to become familiar with the new rules. The proposed legislation completed its House of Commons passage on the 4th of March and underwent its first reading in the House of Lords on the same day. The second reading took place on St Patrick's Day, which also included the committee stage, the report stage, the third stage, and following consideration of amendments, it is now awaiting royal assent. It's important to say from the outset that the law governing corporation tax is complicated. It is grounded in technical statutory language and related rules and practices, where terms have specific and complex meanings. In addition, there are numerous classifications, exemptions and exceptions, and then exemptions again. So the current bill aims to amend existing UK corporation tax legislation and associated legislation. Simply stated, the main provisions currently governing corporation tax are consolidated into the Corporation Tax 2009 and the Corporation Tax Act 2010 as amended, as well as the associated secondary legislation. So what is corporation tax? It's charged throughout the UK on specified profits made by specified companies, public corporations and unincorporated associations such as industrial and provident societies, clubs and trade associations. The present rate, and we'll call it for the purposes of this presentation, the UK main rate, is 21%. In 2012-13, it accrued the fourth largest level of revenue to Her Majesty's Treasury. In another month, the UK main rate will be lowered by the UK Government to 20%, following a downward pattern since the coalition came to office. Of note in this context is the forthcoming unification of the main rate with the small companies rate. This will occur in April 2015 and will result for the first time in many years a single UK rate for corporation tax. A lot of the discussion surrounding the devolution of corporation tax to Northern Ireland began with the Varney Review in 2007, when the then Labour government commissioned a report, considered and rejected the case for devolution. It was raised again by the Coalition's Programme for Government in 2010, and the initial UK government consultation took place in 2011. Rebalancing Northern Ireland's economy was a consultation paper produced by the UK government, and around 3/4 of the respondees were in favour of corporation tax devolution, of which around 2/3 were from Northern Ireland businesses or business owners. That then led to the formation of the Joint Ministerial Working Group and the signing of the Northern Ireland Economic Pact. The next key development was the Autumn Statement in 2014, where it was announced that legislation to devolve corporation tax would be introduced in the current Parliament if the Executive demonstrated that it could manage any financial implications arising from such devolution. We then had the Stormont House Agreement, where after extensive negotiations on the 23rd of December 2014, political leaders concluded talks and produced an agreement that stated legislation would be introduced as soon as Parliament returns to enable the devolution of corporation tax in April 2017. However, progress of the draft legislation was dependent on the Executive meeting agreed conditions, namely legislating for agreed changes to the social security system, the Executive setting a sustainable budget for 2015-16, and the Executive making changes to stabilise its finances in the long run. The Secretary of State then said that if the Stormont parties were to press ahead on agreeing their final budget and on delivering welfare reform legislation, the Government would use its best endeavours to get corporation tax legislation onto the statute books before prorogation or dissolution. The Executive budget 2015-16 then followed, but on 9th of March 2015, the Minister for Social Development withdrew the Welfare Reform Bill at the final stage in the Assembly, following the filing of a petition of concern, and that stopped its passage here in this Assembly. The bill's withdrawal raised issues about the full implementation of the Stormont House Agreement, which, as highlighted above, includes, amongst other things, implementation of welfare reform and devolution of corporation tax. The position was clarified by a statement released on the 9th of March by the Northern Ireland Office, which stated that changes to the welfare system in Northern Ireland were considered a key part of the Stormont House Agreement, and without these changes it would be difficult for the Executive to deliver a balanced budget in the view of the Secretary of State. Teresa Villiers then delivered a statement to the House of Commons on the 11th of March 2015, where she stated that devolution of corporation tax would not occur unless the welfare issue were resolved. This would be delayed by use of the current bill's commencement clause. So she stated that the corporation tax question was difficult and that it was expressly linked with the resolution of welfare reform. The bill contained a commencement clause, and there was no question that this welfare issue must be resolved. So just going through the current bill, and now that we've set out some of the context, the current bill at Clause 1 aims to empower the Assembly from April 2017 to set, or indeed cancel if it so wished, the rate of corporation tax charged on certain trading profits. These profits include income for specified trades and activities here in Northern Ireland, with other sources of income remaining chargeable at the UK main rate. Throughout this current bill, it does not apply to non-trading profits such as income from property. The design of the overall corporation tax system reflects the government's overarching principles, that it would be attractive to businesses, including only having proportionate administrative burdens, that it would encourage genuine economic activity here in Northern Ireland, the costs for the executive in terms of the block grant would be kept proportionate and to a minimum, and that it satisfied the EU state aid rules. This would enable Northern Ireland, if the parties were to agree it appropriate, to set a different rate of corporation tax from the rest of the country. The legislation includes a special regime for smaller companies, and the thinking behind that is to avoid disproportionate administrative burdens and to use existing international rules for larger companies to avoid unnecessary complexity while ensuring robust, fair profit allocation. The bill also contains rules on the treatment of capital allowances and tax relief, including in the creative sector and in research and development, as well as on the treatment of profits and losses in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. The law governing these areas of corporation tax is particularly complicated. If CFP wishes to scrutinise the provisions, it may wish to source expertise to analyse this very complicated area of law. So just making progress, in terms of the power to set the rate, the Northern Ireland rate for financial year will be set by a resolution of the Assembly, provided the resolution is passed before the beginning of any given financial year. Resolution will require cross-community support. Non-trading income, as I said previously, will remain taxable at the UK main rate, and chargeable gains will also remain taxable at the UK main rate. If the rate is not set for any given financial year, but was set for a previous year, that rate applies. In other words, taking the rate from the most recent year if different rates have been set in previous years. Otherwise, if nothing is progressed, the rate remains at the main rate, and also a nil rate may theoretically be set if the Assembly deemed it fit. The main areas then covered by the bill in terms of the specific detail: eligibility for companies with the NI rates applicability, specific rules for small to medium-sized enterprises and large companies, and provisions for loss relief and modifications to specific releases. So companies to which the NI rate applies. The NI rate will apply to the trading profits of qualifying small and medium-sized enterprises and qualifying large companies, provided they meet two conditions, namely, they carry on what is known as a qualifying trade in an accounting period, and I'll go on to define that in a moment, and it's within the charge to corporation tax in respect of that trade, i.e. the SME condition or the large company condition is met. And it only applies to companies, and the company's overall place of incorporation is not actually relevant. So what is a qualifying trade? It's a trade within the charge to corporation tax that is not specifically excluded. Excluded trades include lending and investment activity, including finance, leasing, investment management, insurance in terms of long-term business, reinsurance trade, oil and gas activities. Just the Committee for Finance and Personnel may feel this definition is too broad or too narrow. So, and it may be something you may wish to consider further in their discussions with HMRC and Treasury. Certain back office profits of excluded trades can be brought within the NI rate. The profits are imputed based on a 5% markup of each back office deduction. So there is scope for some financial services activity in terms of back office activity to come within the scope of the regime. Westminster retains the right to amend what's included in excluded trades and what is termed back office activities, and the theory behind this is seemingly to maintain some form of national tax integrity. So CFP and the Executive may wish to engage and encourage with HMRC and HMT to consult with, for example, the banking sector in Northern Ireland as to what they would define their back office activities. This does not appear to have been done as of yet. An SME, for the purposes of this regime, is a company that meets the SME definition under EU regulations, so it has less than 250 employees and has a turnover of either €50 million or a balance sheet asset of €43 million, with at least 75% of its staff time and costs relating to work carried out here in Northern Ireland. SMEs, for the purposes of the new regime, will either be wholly in or out. There are no halfway houses. For companies which then pass the SME condition, the NI rate will apply broadly to all the profits of a qualifying trade carried on by that company. So moving on, a large company is one that is not an SME and has what is known as a Northern Ireland Regional Establishment, or a NIR, and that is a Northern Ireland fixed place of business. So companies that pass the large company condition will compute the profits of a qualifying trade, which are subject to the NI rate under the internationally recognised principles for permanent establishments, and these are currently being reviewed under the BEPS programme by the OECD. So if they have a presence in both Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom, similar rules to what are currently done for permanent establishments will be applied to those governing the allocation of profits to a permanent establishment, and they're found in Chapter 4, Part 2 of the Corporation Tax Act 09. So this effectively means in practice that the company would treat their Northern Ireland trading activity as a separate business from the rest of the UK activity, and it would apportion profits between the two. So who is affected? We can't predict the future, but HMRC estimates the Northern Ireland rate would affect 34,000 companies of all sizes, including 26,500 SMEs, though the burden in terms of applying the new regime will vary greatly depending on their size, existing tax arrangements, whether they have any NI-based trading activity in a given year, and whether their activity is wholly based in Northern Ireland. And the Chartered Institute of Taxation have raised some issues surrounding the burdens in companies falling into those different categories. HMRC have put the present value of total compliance costs for businesses at £35 million. And with regards to SMEs, over 99% of affected small and micro businesses have 100% of their trading activity here in Northern Ireland, and so would not be affected by the thresholds or the complexity applied in the test. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have, and then we'll move on to Mike.
Colonel, first of all, just say a very impressive presentation. Congratulate you on that, and I'll open it up now to questions from the committee. I think Paul, you indicating, and Leslie.
Just one area in particular, and I'm wondering if there's any more clarity on what is meant by that. The current bill does not apply to non-trading profits, such as income from property. Now, many firms, small firms in Northern Ireland, probably are property development companies. Is that it's a very wide-reaching comment. Is there an indication, or has there ever been teased out exactly what they mean by that? Because somebody could set themselves up as a corporation dealing with property as part of that whole overall portfolio, and can they not avail of the tax breaks on that? According to that, it's just maybe a very broad brush, because I know some of this is probably going to need a little bit more focus. Actually, come on, what areas actually are excluded from it, and what areas are. I appreciate the back office end of things with the insurance and all of that industry. Is there any indication?
I have to admit, I think, as I said at the very beginning, it is an extremely complex area of law, and that would be something you would probably have to raise with some form of counsel. Even I would assume if it was a trading activity set up for a business purpose, it may fall within the regime, but it really is something that would require the expertise of either a property lawyer or probably a tax lawyer, or probably the combined efforts of both. I think that would be on my brief to provide real clarity on that issue. I think
there may be several areas of growth industry arising out of this, I suppose.
I certainly think so.
Okay, Paul, Leslie was next.
Thanks, Chair. Again, yes, thank you for that. You did mention the relocation of business, the brass plating and all that sort of thing, but what actually is being done now in the later stages of the bill to ensure that people don't simply relocate their business to Northern Ireland? And say that in inverted commas.
Yeah, well, I think from the outset that was something that the government had feared. It's something that is specifically related to the fact that most financial services, which are probably the easiest to brass plate, as you said, they're probably the easiest activities to relocate, because many of them are done on IT systems that could technically be located in Northern Ireland. And so the preconditions laid out in the bill very clearly state that you have to have X amount of activity taking place in Northern Ireland before you can be considered to have a Northern Ireland regional establishment. So there are quite a lot of tests that large companies specifically must satisfy to ensure that they don't that they don't just move their brass plating. It's something that the government obviously was very keen to avoid if possible, and one of the overarching principles was to ensure the relocation of genuine economic activity. Of course, as with all regimes, there may be scope for profit shifting in terms of going through the rules or around the rules, and that is obviously something the committee may wish to raise with HMRC in terms of the solidity and the overall effectiveness of it. But in terms of most companies falling under this, there are very stringent tests that X amount of activity has to take place in Northern Ireland. It has to be activity of a certain kind. It's all very clearly defined within the bill. And although it should be a concern and a watching brief should be maintained, it is not perhaps the hot issue that you may consider it to be, because the thresholds and the specifications set out in the bill are quite clear and quite easy to follow.
The big one, of course, is the financial services industry.
Yeah.
And that could be quite interesting. But thanks very much. That's fine.
John.
Thanks, Chair and Con. It's around really that the banks and even spreading into utility companies. Now, my understanding with utilities is that the regulator here has the power to take account of the tax rates and what level they might set standards up. But I don't think people will want to see, and I think that will be watched very closely on banks, because I don't think people will want to see banking sector getting a huge tax break out of this. Might be some sympathy in supporting, if it was going to support branches and towns and places like that, but and I suppose given the reputation of banks, you seem relatively confident that the legislation is robust enough to deal with that. I mean, that would certainly be a concern I would have about around banking sector and not wanting banks to benefit significantly from a lower rate of corporation tax.
Yeah, I think looking at the perspective of those who wrote the bill, that is specifically what they are trying to avoid in order to protect both the tax base of the City of London and obviously maintain a national rate for the banking sector. So I think from the outset that was a key principle of the of the system. Financial services are excluded from the regime, with the exception of back office activities. The majority of financial services, it's very clearly prescribed what is and what isn't excluded, but generally speaking, for the purposes of the discussion today, financial services are excluded. In terms of back office activities, it's on the base of a 5% imputed markup of profits, and that's a one-off election is made by that financial services company. And those back office activities will be prescribed by Treasury regulation. That is something I think the committee may wish to consider further, because what is and what isn't considered a back office activity may well affect business making decisions of what is relocated to Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland has very specific comparative advantage in back office activities for financial services organisations. But in terms of day-to-day retail banking, from the face of the bill, it seems that is excluded. It would be the back office activities that we have a competitive advantage at that aren't.
Say competitive advantage even before you cut corporation tax. You just thinking in general, whether it's from the cost of office space to everything. Are you counting just the competitive advantage when we would cut corporation tax?
I suppose I'm working for the assumption that a lot of financial services organisations have seen the offer that Northern Ireland would make and have relocated appropriately. I suppose it would be a consideration that moving forward, corporation tax could be a further go to that. But I'm just looking at the broader scheme.
On changing the rate, is it correct that you can just vary the rate? But because you've no control over bands or anything else, it would just be the one rate then, or could you introduce two rates if you wanted to give, hypothetically, if you wanted to give a better tax break to smaller size companies? You have the power to do that? Set the rate?
As far as I'm aware, it's a variation of the main rate, but I will double check that, but as far as I'm aware, it's a variation of the main rate. The rates have been unified and are being unified in April 2015, and as far as I'm aware, and I will certainly check this and get back to the member, it would be a variation of that UK main rate, either up or down.
Michaela wanted in.
Yeah, just on that, I suppose, on the back of John's question, and my question was kind of just based around that. I'm thinking of my own area where I come from. Would there be like a rurality rate for small to medium enterprises, given the fact that, obviously, a Strabane rate, yes, a Strabane rate specific. Given that, in terms of infrastructure and all the rest, that there's laws to the west, that we don't have that, and in terms of enticing new businesses to relocate there, and that's what I'm hearing coming out of the sector in my own area. So I was just on the back of that. Was there another rate?
I suppose that would be a policy decision for this Assembly and for the Executive. As I said, as far as I'm aware, it would be one rate. And we would essentially have two rates. We would have the UK main rate and the Northern Ireland rate, but it would be one rate would be decided by this Assembly.
Just flexibilities around the rate.
It would then be built into the policy objectives of the rate that would be set overall by the Assembly. But as I said, I will certainly double check with.
I've heard of the rich and the famous having Swiss bank accounts. I don't know if we'll have a Strabane bank account would be what people would be seeking in the future in that regard. Conor, I just ask you, I suppose, final point from this part of it. You've obviously been following the passage of the bill fairly closely in that regard, and I appreciate, given the length of time to which the issue of corporation tax was flagged up, there's been vast amounts of preparation work have gone into doing this. I presume then on that basis, so that we're on track with everything, that what has been proposed by the government initially has gone through its passage fairly unscathed, in the sense that, or indeed perhaps unaltered, on the basis of that there hasn't really been, has there been anything of amendments taken or agreed? I appreciate that's a very short time frame that it's gone through as well, and that's it.
I think there was one very minor amendment regarding commencement clause, but in terms of substantive amendments to the overall programme and the overall scheme, there haven't been. There was a lot of discussion. The MP from Foyle tabled an amendment and created a lot of discussion around the issue of credit unions and provident societies, but it was decided by the government and accepted that that amendment wouldn't attach itself to the bill, so it's gone. I appreciate
that. That's been an issue that they've raised also with us as a committee. I know it's been with Daddy as well. It's obviously across Commons.
In terms of the bill, as much as it stood when it entered the House of Commons.
Okay, Conal, thank you very much for that. Very comprehensive. Michael, then.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this section really outlines the key considerations arising from the bill in terms of anticipated future investment, reductions to the block grant, cost implications and any potential impact to other devolved administrations. So if we start off with anticipated future investment, generally speaking, a lower Northern Ireland corporation tax rate would result in companies paying less tax and expectantly increasing their profits. Now, the current bill, however, does not prescribe how companies should spend this additional profit. Companies are under no obligation to reinvest any profits back into Northern Ireland. So first scrutiny point there is what measures could the Executive take to encourage those companies benefiting from the Northern Ireland rate to reinvest profits here in Northern Ireland? So, in terms of anticipated future investment, really there's basically two types. There being domestic investment and foreign direct investment, or FDI. In terms of domestic investment, really, the main scrutiny point here is does the Executive have any targets for increased domestic investment following a reduction to the rate? For foreign direct investment, or FDI, FDI really, generally speaking, is expected to benefit the host economy in several ways, really. It can increase levels of productivity, introduces new management techniques and practices, introduces new markets, it attracts investment to areas of social disadvantage, increases capital investment and increases high-skilled labour opportunities. Now, Conal mentioned the Varney report in 2007, and it stated that corporation tax, or corporate taxation, was not the most important factor to influence FDI location decisions. And this is evidenced in Figure 1 on page 19. This is taken from Ernst & Young's European Attractiveness Survey, and it lists factors that companies take into consideration when deciding on a location to establish their operations. And as you can see, corporate taxation is ranked down at number 8, with the stability and transparency of political, legal and regulatory environment at number 1. So, with that in mind, then, what measures can the Executive take outside the corporation tax rate to improve the attractiveness of Northern Ireland for potential FDI? And the next section really highlights the Republic of Ireland's FDI experience, particularly in relation to their economic performance during the recent recession. Scrutiny point here: what lessons can the Executive learn from the Irish economy to improve FDI levels in Northern Ireland? So then, moving on to the next section, which is really reductions to the block grant. A reduction to the Northern Ireland corporation tax rate necessitates a reduction to the block grant due to the current EU state aid rules and the financial arrangements of the prevailing devolution agreement. So this subsection really sets out the context in terms of the financial arrangements and EU state aid law. Now, the first section here really relates to financial arrangements, which is really about the block grant, but I'm sure members are familiar with what the block grant is and what it isn't. So I'll move on to the EU state aid rules. So in order for a region to have a different tax rate from its EU member state, the Azores case establishes that the region must demonstrate institutional, procedural and fiscal autonomy. Now, back in 2011, the Treasury took the view that Northern Ireland would meet the institutional and procedural autonomy conditions, but however, in order to meet the fiscal autonomy criteria, a reduction in the block grant was needed. And I quote, Northern Ireland's block grant would be adjusted to reflect the fiscal costs of a reduction in the rate of corporation tax. So Northern Ireland must retain its fiscal autonomy, and any reduction in tax receipts must not be offset by additional aid or subsidies by the central government of the member state. The extent of the reduction in tax receipts must therefore be measured and the block grant adjusted accordingly. So in February of this year, the Treasury explained that the method for adjusting the block grant to Northern Ireland would be based on the same approach and arrangements that the Treasury made with the Scottish Executive during their negotiations around the Scottish rate of income tax. Now, the Treasury also appear confident that this approach would not be breaching any EU state aid rules. So a scrutiny point here, what measures can the Executive take to ensure that there would be no breaches in EU state aid rules? Now, also at this point, I've noted that the issue of state aid is discussed in the next few paragraphs, which I won't go into detail, really, in relation to industrial derating and the Small Business Rates Relief Scheme. The discussion really queries whether state aid rules would need to be revisited in light of future corporation tax cuts. Okay. So moving on then to calculating the block grant reduction, and that's on page 24. So this section really discusses how the block grant reduction is going to be calculated. The financial annex to the Stormont House Agreement reiterates the requirement to reduce the block grant subsequent to a lower rate in Northern Ireland. And it states, the block grant will be adjusted to reflect corporation tax revenues foregone by the UK Government, both direct and behavioural effects. So direct effects really refers to the amount of revenue raised in Northern Ireland from corporation tax. And in order to estimate that share of the UK corporation tax receipts that accrue in Northern Ireland, that estimation is really central to adjusting the block grant. Now, this is complicated by the fact that HMRC do not collect corporation tax receipts by location of activity, and therefore does not currently hold any accurate data on the size of the Northern Ireland corporation tax base. HMRC suggests that Northern Ireland's share of the UK corporation tax receipts is roughly 1.2%, and Treasury estimated that Northern Ireland corporation tax receipts for 2009-10 financial year were 465 million, rising to 685 million in the financial year 2015-16. So what measures can the Executive take to ensure that HMRC's estimation of Northern Ireland's share of UK tax receipts is robust, fair and accurate? So in addition to the direct effects, any block grant reduction must include a calculation of behavioural effects such as profit shifting and brass plating and tax motivated incorporation. So I've just given a brief definition, very quick definition of profit shifting here from Treasury. Profit shifting arises when companies artificially manipulate transactions so that their taxable profits arise in the low tax jurisdictions, while the activities generating those profits remain in the high tax jurisdiction. And tax motivated incorporation really refers to sole traders or the self-employed who will form companies or corporations to take advantage of a corporation tax which will be lower than an income tax rate. Okay, so Treasury assert that the rules in the current bill address these challenges of profit shifting and tax motivated incorporation, mainly because the rules apply to trading profits only, and as Conall discussed, not profits from the sale of property. So really, to sum up this section, estimating the direct and behavioural costs of an NI rate that is lower than the UK main rate is challenging. Calculations are based largely on assumptions of both the proportion of the total amount of UK corporation tax receipts and the amount of profit-shifting behaviour as a whole.
Okay, Michael, thank you for that. I think particularly it's very useful in terms of, as we progress this issue, sort of flagging up a range of issues, particularly both for ourselves and wider context of the executive. Does anybody have any questions at this stage? If not, I'd like to thank both of you for your presentation. It's been very useful. And obviously, members, as agreed, will send on this research paper to the department for a response to the issues raised. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Okay, folks, our next session, our next item on the agenda is the Land and Property Services. We've already discussed some questions earlier on, are the performance against business targets. Now, there are papers starting at page 70 in the pack, and in particular the balance card at pages 79 to 82 pack. I'd also like to remind members that we'll be having two items, although will be separate witnesses from LPS this morning. One is this, which is performance against business targets. We'll then be moving on to a separate on the non-domestic revaluation. So if you have any questions on the non-domestic revaluation, particularly I suppose some of the issues that were raised by the likes of local businesses, whenever they spoke to us recently, if you'll hold those until the second section. Welcome to the table Colin Boyle, who's the Chief Executive of LPS, Patricia McCall, who's the Director of Revenue and Benefits Reform, Mervyn Adair and Mick Corey. And I'll hand over to yourselves and we'll be taking questions afterwards.
Okay, Chair, thank you very much. Good morning. You'd asked in the correspondence for a wee bit of just a background about what LPS does, about how we performed and what our key challenges are going forward. So I'll take a few minutes, if I may, just to summarise that. If there are any questions in terms of detail, one of the reasons I've got some of the directors with me here is we can dig into that detail however deep you may wish to, and we can cover some of that ground. LPS, as an organisation, we collect, we process, and we manage land and property information, and we use that to underpin our collection of rates. We're doing that in support of the Executive's commitment to economic and social development in Northern Ireland. The LPS role is a multifaceted role. Some examples of what we do or what we cover. We collect over £1 billion in rates each year to fund public services provided by central and local government. We administer various rate-related benefits and reliefs, including housing benefit, rate relief, loan pension allowance, as well as a number of business-related reliefs to help those in need to pay their rates and to provide assistance to business. We carry out the statutory responsibility to maintain the valuation lists which support the collection of rates, and we provide a registration service for recording legal interests in land and property and providing land information for conveyancing purposes. We provide mapping services which are used widely across both public and private sectors, informing policy development and enhancing service delivery. And we deliver property valuations, estate management and other property data services to the public sector. To give a sense of the volumes that we work with, we manage over 1 million customer inquiries a year. We deal with 777,000 approximately rating customers. We manage over 35,000 amendments to the valuation list each year, and we issue bills to all domestic and non-domestic ratepayers in Northern Ireland. So a wee bit just about the organisation itself. So in terms of 2014-15, how did we do against the business plan challenges? I want to cover some of the key highlights in there. There's about 6 or 7 I'd just like to draw your attention to. Overall, out of 24 key performance targets in the business plan, 19 of them were green on target, 3 of them were amber and 2 of them were red. So at that stage of the year, at the end of the third quarter, we're in pretty good shape. In terms of cash collection, first of all, in December 14, we were well on target with that. We've actually gone one step further in February 15 and we've achieved the target. 1.169 billion collected versus a target of 1.165. So we've exceeded the target by 4.6 million. I'd just like to commend the work done by managers and staff. I think it's been a very challenging year to actually deliver this, and it's been a very, very positive outcome in a difficult environment, in a very challenging economic climate. And when you see what staff deal with on the phones and via correspondence every day, you actually get a sense of the magnitude of the challenge they face and how well they've actually delivered on it. One of the questions I've asked in coming into the organisation was that target a challenging one, and indeed it was. I think to look at a 27 million uplift on the 2013-14 outturn, which is a 2.4% increase, particularly given that the 2013-14 target hadn't been met, I think shows it wasn't a soft target by any stretch. In terms of debt recovery and reduction, we're on track with that, and that's about reducing actionable debt by £4 million or by 5%. So at December 14, the LPS actionable debt target was 5 million or 2.6% ahead of profile. Bringing the committee up to date to the end of February 15, actionable debt stood at 86.7 million, which is 2.2 million ahead of profile. And this represents a reduction of 101 million from the reported debt figure, 187 million at the end of December. So good positive progress being made in there. Big factors, just by way of information, in the level of actionable debt is pending court appearances. They make up about £32 million of that actionable debt, plus recently assessed or valued properties where there is insufficient time to move cases through the recovery process before the April 15-16 billing process. That accounts for about £22 million. One of the big factors, I think, in terms of helping us to manage actionable debt has been the key enabling activity around improving IT workflow processes. For example, we brought in automated refunds for certain cases and introducing modernised rate payment channels, including an online payment site which removes the 2% credit card handling charge, an automated telephone payment system and payment via PayPoint rather than PayZone. The post office payment process and payment option still remains. We also have an automated interface between LPS and the Enforcement Judgment Office due to go live in September 15, which will further help the situation. I suppose another measure of the extent to which debt is coming on much better under control is that final notices have decreased by 6.5% from this time last year. There's been a reduction in the process and debt proceedings by over 15%, and decrees have dropped by 8.8%. And that reflects an improvement in terms of us internally in respect of our data quality, but also an increased commitment by ratepayers to pay. Moving on to housing benefit, we manage and monitor administration of housing benefit for owner-occupiers. So there's about 65,000 customers in that category, generating 120,000 change of circumstances each year. Workload volume at April 2014 stood at over 52,000 claim actions. We've brought that down to 22,500 by January 15. Which is a very significant achievement by the staff on housing benefit. Again, in financial accuracy terms, we're performing against target pretty well. We've hit 90.8% financial accuracy against the target of 90%. And that's reported on by the SSA Standards Assurance Unit. That's an independent measure. We can improve that, but it's a tough battle to try and drive that one up. Non-domestic reval, I know you're going to cover that in a subsequent evidence session. We have successfully delivered new draft non-domestic readable values on the 30th of September. We've successfully published a list as promised in early March. And it's been a very transparent process. We haven't hidden away in any building in LPS. We've been out and about. We've worked very closely with all of the lobby groups and the constituent groups. And I've been very impressed actually by how much we've made this a very transparent and clear process and allowed people to engage with us. In terms of mapping and spatial NI, we had a target to improve the level of uptake of our spatial NI desktop facility. We've increased by 40% the usage of that within DFP, and overall we've increased the usage of that by over 69%. And that's been recorded at the 2nd of March. Mapping is a key area of LPS business, as I said earlier, in terms of supporting both the public and private sector, both councils and central government. And I would invite the committee to come down to Lanyon Plaza at some point in time to see some of the things that we do there. I think it's much more colourful to see some of that in practice, as distinct from hearing it in dry surroundings of me trying to describe it, or even Mick, my colleague here, trying to describe it. In terms of the rebate replacement system, following approval from the Minister in May 14, the IT system replacement project was initiated in October 14. The strategic outline case has been approved by DFP Supply, and work has commenced in the outline business case, which provides a short list of options identifying which best meets the project's objectives and best value for money. IT projects are high risk. It's about doing the right thing. We just don't want to pick up replacements for current systems. What we want to actually do is move to a proper data management structure and an operational data store which all of the replacement systems will feed off. So we are going to move into a situation over the next number of years where we will replace systems on an ongoing basis in a much more robust way than we ever have in the past. In terms of preparing for local government reform, most significant change to the rating system in the last 10 years. These changes have been managed by a cross-directorate project board in consultation with our colleagues in Rating Policy Division. We've had really substantial testing of the impact on our systems, both on our processes and our IT systems, of the boundary changes, the district rate convergence scheme, as well as non-domestic reval outcomes and changes. And that has been completed prior to calculation of the 2015-16 rates bills. We're in a positive place with that. I wouldn't deny there may be a few gremlins that are possible, but we've ironed those out to a very, very strong extent. Lastly, in terms of key highlights, our registration function, in terms of registering property and land. Our e-registration facility is accounting now for 85% of applications, which is the highest in the UK, which is very, very laudable. That's bringing about really significant reductions in processing times for normal cases. We're seeing very significantly reduced rejection rates in terms of the e-registration. Paper-based isn't quite as good, but the e-registration has really proven its worth. We're also experiencing a 27% increase in uptake since, or intake since 2012. We're getting about 71,000 applications a year into registration. And we're starting with the property, development starting to come back. We're starting to approach 2008 intake figures. And again, that's a part of the business which I would like the committee to see, because I think rather than us talking about it, when you actually go in and see it, it is a processing business in the same way as most of what we do is, and it's obviously a lot more informative to see it in action. Looking ahead at the key challenges, there will certainly be an impact on our business across all of the different facets of our business by the NICS voluntary exit scheme, and we'll have to manage the impact of that very carefully. We're developing a new 5-year strategy for the organisation to be called LPS 2020, and hopefully we'll not need the benefit of hindsight to make sure that it was a good one. A lot of very thorough preparation going into that as we speak. The defence of the non-domestic reval lists, I think, will catch our eye for quite some time in the next couple of years going forward. I mentioned earlier the development of the new IT system for corrections and the rating development process, and also the development of a rebate replacement scheme as well. Both of those things are going to actually have a significant impact in terms of drawing us in to make sure that we get the right ICT platform going forward. Housing benefit performance will continue to dominate, and registration, as I mentioned earlier, given the upturn in the housing and property market. That's a quick canter over the ground.
Okay, Colin, that's been very useful. We have a number of questions through. I suppose start off with Paul first of all.
Very much indeed. Appreciate that. Just looking at the housing benefit processing, and appreciate you said it was 90.8, and that's what the recovery is sitting at the moment, or the accuracy at 90.8, which probably leaves almost 10% or 9.8% or 9.2% are not necessarily sorted out. I'm just wondering, is there any benchmarking dealt with to identify how that works with other regions in relation to that housing benefit aspect? Why? Appreciate that there's a large number have been dealt with in the interim. There was a legacy issue of 52,000 or something had not been, and you've reduced that down very quickly over the last few months. I'm wondering, where do you benchmark and where do you set the target?
Okay. A key benchmark.
Mervyn would...
Well, I'll draw Mervyn in the meantime. Key benchmark for us, I suppose, in terms of benefits, given the fact that we've got Standards Assurance Unit in the SSA looking at what our financial accuracy is, your benchmark is how they perform on other benefits. I know housing benefits is slightly different, but they're sitting at high 90s. I think we've got a legacy in LPS whereby in recent years the focus on the rates side of the business would have outweighed the focus on the housing benefit side. And I think what Mervyn has brought to the equation with Patricia in the last 2-3 years has been a real focus in terms of trying to drive up both the throughput, the casework, and the financial accuracy. So yeah, to get 91% is okay. I wouldn't be shouting from the treetops and say it's the best performance in the world. And I mentioned in my briefing that it is a hard drive to get that up even in 2 or 3 percentage points. A lot of the focus on that has got to be around quality and making sure that you actually make sure that the case quality is managed very, very carefully. So what we put in place are standards assurance teams, if you like, quality assurance teams, to make sure that whenever someone is working on the case, that case gets properly checked and checked again. And that's what we're trying to do to drive up that financial accuracy.
And what about data sharing in relation to that?
In terms of comparison with other organisations where we've done any benchmarking against?
Well, certainly the main comparator with housing benefit accuracy is also a major problem in the rest of the UK. And Colin was talking at high 90s for the normal social security benefits. It certainly would be nowhere near that in terms of the rest of the UK. And they are suffering the same issues in terms of ourselves. And certainly, I don't know the exact figures off the top of my head, but you're not going any higher than mid-90s with them, and a lot of them would be in the same as ourselves. And I think it's just been down to, particularly in the rest of the UK, is the pressure on local government in terms of budget constraints and what they prioritised in terms of processing housing benefit. Certainly, we have done a lot of. The big issue with housing benefit accuracy is that when they do the sample, it's looking at the complete live load. So it's not just what did you do yesterday or what did you do this week. And they could pull cases out that are 5-6 years old. Haven't been looked at that for that amount of time. So certainly a lot of the work that we have done is very much around making sure that we are not contaminating the live load, and the local figures that we produce in terms of what we process on a daily basis would certainly be in the mid-90s. But as I say, when you look at how this is measured, it actually is based on the complete live load. I think another important issue, which is a legacy of the huge backlogs that we incurred because of the messages that came down, known as Atlas, but it's an online notification of all benefit changes. When we accrued the huge backlogs, in terms of measuring accuracy, the Standards Assurance Unit class anything where a case has not been processed within 28 days as an error, even though the case is actually correct. But if it hasn't been processed in 28 days, now because of the huge backlog we were carrying, a number of the errors that we that are included in the 90% are actually what we class as these 28-day errors. In other words, it's been marked wrong because the case wasn't processed in time, as opposed to it being financially inaccurate. And that's something that
Is there a reason? Is there any reason for the delay? Is that sometimes information. I appreciate that sometimes in relation to housing benefit, you can be dealing with information coming from Housing Executive or DSD, for that matter. Is there any mismatch in relation to information coming from that aspect of it?
Now, the big problem we had was the receipt of the 2-3 years ago when the Atlas, it stands for Automated Transfer to Local Authority System, and essentially what happened as part of the DWP strategy to reduce fraud and error, any case or any customer or claimant in receipt of benefit, when a change takes place to that benefit, an automatic feed goes out to all the other benefit systems. This was introduced for housing benefit, and suddenly overnight we were receiving in the region of 100,000 notifications a year. And
so it's not as of, and just on that point, it's not as you are whenever the issue in April. It's during the year somebody could fall out of receipt of benefit, housing benefit, and as a consequence, it might well be just due to a small minor error, and it might well be reinstated again, but it might take a period of time for that to be reinstated, and therefore does that impact upon your backlog work then?
Well, and all of the notifications we've done a lot of work to try and automate them, because essentially when these things come out, say roughly 10,000 a month, up until we done the automation, it was impossible. You had to look at every single one to determine was there a change, and in some instances the change could have been 5p a week, sometimes it could have been £50 a week. But you had to look at every single one, and obviously the physical effort required to do that, along with the normal work, created the backlog situation. We have now introduced automation whereby at the moment 40–50% of the notifications, the system can look at them and determine is it something that will bring about a change to the overall assessment of housing benefit, and that has sort of helped significantly in terms of helping to reduce the backlog of automated messages, because these automated messages are just like any change of circumstances, and as Colin said, we have close to half that. We're also going to increase the automation, and really the key to all of this is getting back to a situation where we're completely on top of the work. We're well on our way to that, but certainly I would like to see us reducing it by another 50%. And once the whole thing, once you get to that point, your whole service to the customer obviously improves, but also the pressure on staff dealing with these reduces, and almost as a direct consequence of that, you automatically start to improve accuracy of cases. Okay. So it's an overall package really that comes together. If you're in a backlog situation, it certainly can create accuracy problems, but the more you eat into the accuracy or into the backlog situation, it certainly will have a direct impact on improving accuracy.
The other thing is just to say, Chair, the other thing that struck me going over to the housing benefits section a few times when I first got here was like the complexity of it, the complexity of the work. And I mean, the lead time to get someone up to speed on a housing benefit to work with housing benefit?
It's at least a year before someone would be classed as up to speed, and you wouldn't even at that stage say they're fully. And I think the other problem, when we hit the backlog situation, there was significant pressures and people started to leave, and we had a significant drain in the amount of people leaving housing benefit, purely based on the pressures. Now, we then introduced an embargo to prevent really almost the drain in terms of expertise, and I suppose at the same time we started to then have the overall issues in terms of budget constraint and whatnot, and the reduction in people leaving anyhow. So we have now got the staff. We recruited 27 extra staff, and we've been able to retain them. So the level of expertise and knowledge of the staff is improving as well. And when you put all that together, the mix is a lot better than it was this time last year.
It's good to see that improving. Michaela?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And just on that note, I suppose, if you'll allow me, Chair, to commend your colleagues in Foyle in Orchard House for the work that they're doing. I mean, I have to say, any time that I have contacted their offices, they have dealt in terms of tracking and dealing with cases that I present to them. They have been very helpful, and they're the people that are at the coalface of all of these issues in terms of the challenges that lie ahead, and particularly in the economic climate. But just my questions on C8, which is at page 79. It's yourself, Patricia. The ministerial and executive decisions to implement the necessary R&B IT changes, obviously coming into effect from the 1st of April. Is there any clarification on what the R&B IT changes mean? And could you give us some information on the indicative time frame for completion of the 3 phases? I know progress 1 and 2. Phase 1 and 2 is in progress. So just, I suppose, looking for some indicative time frame for the completion of those, and will they be in operation in terms of the relief schemes coming forward?
In relation to the local government reform and the changes, yes. The local government reform is requiring us to do very substantive changes to the IT system. The rating IT system is built on a property summing to a ward, summing to a district council, and then that district council, by using that methodology, we then input the correct district council rates to calculate the bills at the end of the turn of year. What happened, obviously, because of local government reform, is that 26 district councils go to 11, 500 and something wards go to 400 and something. So every property in Northern Ireland had to be reallocated to a new ward and a new district council. Alongside that, we've had to look at our office structure to make sure that we could actually balance the work across 11 district councils as opposed to 26. And in addition to that, we have the councils merging, but we also have some boundary issues which we have referred to. I mean, the most obvious one is probably Belfast, Lisburn, Castlereagh, where a significant number of properties are moving from Lisburn into Belfast and from Castlereagh into Belfast. And there's also some other areas in Northern Ireland. For example, there's a ward which is actually called Bally Ward, which is moving from wherever it is into, and I'm sure Mr McAllister will probably give you more detail on it than I can, but those are sort of boundary changes. There's another one on the border between what is currently the Dungannon area and what's the Armagh Council. So there are boundary changes, there's the council merger.
There's not to forget Cedar Grove, which moved from North Down into
I'll make a specific I'll make a specific note of that to make sure it's gone the right way.
Let you forget that particular
keeping us all awake at night.
I wouldn't want you to get the wrong bill now.
I think, to be fair, probably people were quite happy to get the bill they were previously getting.
Yeah, I think it depends which side of the line you end up on. So all of that has to be done. We've been looking at the offices to change those, and when we looked at the changes needed to the IT system, basically there was an enormous amount that needed to be done between sort of last summer and this year. So we basically de-risked the project by breaking it into 3 phases, and we've done the IT changes in 3 phases. Phases 1 and 2 are necessary to enable us to run the turn of year bills, and fingers crossed that was done at the weekend. So phases 1 and 2 have been put in place and have now been run. Phase 3 of the IT changes relates to the recovery process. So that's, in other words, when people get their bill, if they don't pay, they get a final demand, and then after that, we then start looking at court processes and so on. Phase 3 relates to that recovery court processes, but so we actually have an additional amount of time in order to do that. We don't need to run any court processes until about the middle of May. So as long as Phase 3 is completed by then, we'll be okay. The other thing that we've had to do, of course, in the IT system is put in place the district rate subsidy or the district rate convergence scheme, and that has now been fed in to the system as well. That has been quite complex because, for example, if you take somewhere like Causeway Coast and Glens, where you have 4 councils coming together, at least 2, if not 3 of the councils will get district rate subsidy, where the councils won't, the people living in those areas will, and the rates are different for each of them. So it's been quite a complex area to try and manage it all. But as I say, we closed the system at the weekend and ran the bills, and so far so good.
It's only Wednesday.
Well, we hope that you'll all be receiving your bills with effect from the 2nd of April onwards. So I'm sure you'll all look forward to that, as will I.
And you're confident Phase 3 will...
Phase 3 will be done before the recovery phase goes in. It's actually not quite as complex. And then later on in the year, we've actually now got another phase, because the court service is going to change their allocation of courts on the basis of the new boundaries, and we'll take that on board, but that won't happen until later this year.
So just on the wider context of as Michaela raised it, in terms of the RPA situation,
yeah.
Obviously you've highlighted, I think everyone can accept, particularly on the IT side of things, that there's a lot more challenges, indeed a good deal of work to be gone through because of the RPA. Just on the flip side of the coin, in terms of any opportunities, you're moving to, I suppose, a fresh situation of 11 new councils. I suppose this is probably more for Colm than anybody else in relation to this, but is there any opportunities for better or new relationships with those councils? I mean, given the fact that in terms of the relationship, be it on the rate collection, be it on the issue of identification of new properties or rates arrears, while there's a very strong incentive for LPS to consistently try to improve that situation, I suppose given the extent to which then the vast bulk of income that councils will receive will be simply through the rates, there's a massive incentive for them to be helpful in that regard. I just wonder if you could comment on any sort of actions being taken to improve relationships then and build relationships with the new councils.
I mean, I was very alive coming into post in September that the relationship with the councils was currently very important. And when you move from 26 to 11, there's an opportunity there to actually crystallise the service around an even tighter way with 11 rather than 26. I think with 26, you can try and manage an interface, but it becomes a bit thinner on the ground. With 11, you can really build a very collaborative relationship, a good, deep relationship. So far, myself and the senior team, a number of members of the senior team, we've been out, I've met the chief executives and senior teams in Newtownabbey and Antrim, Belfast, Fermanagh and Omagh, Newry, Mourne and Down, Causeway Coast and Glens. We're in Lisburn tomorrow, and a couple more next week. They'll all be done by the end of April, and I say all be done in the sense of hello, here's who I am, here's who we are. This is how we want to really build partnership working with you. So the sharing of data is obviously very key. The whole thing about making sure that.
Do you have any sort of or any proposed sort of, I suppose, either formal or informal structures to try and build? I mean, I know in the past, in the more diverse, but there's been meetings with the finance officers of each of the councils and that.
The structures will still be there.
On that side of it, I suppose, to try to see where, from a practical point of view, that could be built on.
Yeah, and I think different councils have different strengths. What we're trying to do, given that they're going on to a larger scale now, is to make sure that we see a much more common platform of relationship building. So if there are extra things they can do, for example, in terms of property surveys with us, give us more information earlier about the properties, the full set of information that we need, both in terms of who owns it, what the address, the proper address is, so forth. We can get that information right early and get it right in an easier way than we currently get it. I think that will be a massive step forward. it's a big incentive for us, and it's a big incentive for them. So the data sharing is very, very key. I think the councils also are probably going to be keen to move away from let's just look at the 12 months ahead. I think some of the councils want to look at what...
Yeah, but more strategically in that regard, yeah.
Yeah, so we're keen to build on strategically where they want to go and to look for the win-win in terms of doing that. We've had some interesting conversations, particularly with Belfast and Fermanagh and Alnwick Council as well. Some interesting perspectives on that, because I think they're in a situation where they're saying we don't want to be treated differently than anybody else. So let's make sure that we try and build a relationship which is based on the same criteria across the piece. And I respect the fact that different councils are in different places. Some councils are, their building control sections are stronger than others, and it'll take me a bit of time to build that up. But we'll work with them to try and build the partnership there the best way.
Okay, I think that's useful. Leslie?
Thanks, Chair. Arguably the most important thing's getting your money in and debt reduction, and you have covered it fairly well. The targets, I think, though, perhaps in our report, are up to 31st December 2014. What's the latest sort of rushes on that?
You have the latest March?
In terms of the cash flows, Colin said we have surpassed the target as at the end of February, and we had collected 1.169. We'll get, I suspect, quite close to 1.175 in terms of cash collected. In terms of debt, as of the end of February, we were still £2 million ahead of profile in terms of reducing the overall debt. And I think, as Colin sort of mentioned, the one issue that we are wary of is the number of late assessments that have come on in the final quarter. Really, because sort of valuation resources had to be front-loaded at the start of the year towards the revaluation, which means that more of the normal work, for want of a better, is coming on, and that the late assessments, the difficulty with those is that the bill goes out, but you cannot go through the normal recovery process. We have staff on the phone literally every day now, ringing up people who have got late bills to try and get cash in. But as things stand, with a fair wind in terms of debt, we will be close to the target. I can't say, because it's of the nature of it, you can be 2 million ahead of profile at 1 month and suddenly something happens and
that's why I asked the question,
and throws us off course. Yeah. But we're trying to manage it as best as we possibly can. We're managing the late assessments as best as we can, and certainly the situation at the end of February was a slight improvement than what we had been at the end of January. It was slightly more worrying in terms of the profile, but we have pulled that back in February, and we're still carrying out exactly the same actions to just try and keep on top of it.
Colin mentioned the various quite a wide range of measures actually you've taken, to tackle it. Are there any new measures being planned for 15-16?
I think the key thing we are very much sort of focused on, we started to do it to some extent this year, but it is very much customer segmentation. And rather than tarring all ratepayers with the same brush in terms of the action we take, it's understanding the whole payment history and of different segments of customer, and then putting those into what the can't pay us, won't pay us, and basically understanding what lever to pull for each particular type of case. On top of that, we've mentioned we are using more and more credit reference agency information, and certainly a new thing that has come in with that is what's known as propensity to pay. And again, that gives us information about ratepayers in terms of their ability to pay, based on a lot of information that has been gleaned from the credit reference agencies. So, for example, if we can see that there is nothing, that people can't pay or won't pay us, well then we will certainly pursue them an awful lot quicker, and obviously we'll try and work with the can't pay us. But as I say, customer segmentation, the use of propensity to pay, to me, are going to be key features that we will use going into this rating year. And as I say, they have worked well to date, and I think we can build a lot on those over the next year. They're the type of things that the private sector uses, and also local authorities in the rest of the UK widely use, and I think we very much need to piggyback on the back of that.
Okay, could I turn quickly then to one on the red status, the replacement of the rating IT system. Where exactly are we at this stage?
Well, in terms of the rating of the IT system, probably one of the primary reasons why that's delaying, as I mentioned earlier on, to have a situation whereby you say, okay, we have a system there which has worked pretty well, it's coming to the end of its shelf life, our commercial arrangements are going to run out, let's just buy something similar and plug it back in. It's not as simple as plugging it back in, though. I think we've struggled with our management information down the years. I think we've struggled to get a proper single view of property, a proper single view of address, and a proper single view of the customer. We've got information streams in the organisation from mapping, from registration, from rating side, from valuation side. All of those are sitting in different systems. You've got different databases with slightly different information on it. To try and reconcile that, data structures need to be the same. You're continually matching data, cleansing the data. We waste a lot of time doing that. We get it right most of the time, but sometimes we get it wrong. We get it wrong, we get it badly wrong. I want to make sure that we move ourselves away from let's stop talking about basic systems and let's start putting in place services that work. So we need a management information service within the organisation that actually works. And the way to do that is to build it around what we're going to call an operational data store. And that data store is how we will draw off common information. So it doesn't matter what part of our business in LPS you're in, you will take the information about the property or the customer, the ratepayer, from that data store, and it will be the single source of truth. Now that will slow us down a bit, but I would rather go slower, get it right, than rush out to buy another system that you just plug in to replace the last one, and you still have all of those underlying causes. And I've looked back at reports in LPS of 4, 5, 6 years old, and I've said exactly the same thing as I've just said to you now. And we have never really gripped this properly and addressed it. I want through LPS 2020 to grip it.
So have you developed the specification yet?
The specification had been developed, but not for that. We have some of the operational data store work.
Not finalised yet?
Not finalised. We'll have the data store in pretty good shape, probably within about the 6-month stage of the new year. That's the estimated timescales for that. And I think we'll have a specification hammered out somewhere in around that same time frame as to how we actually align the rest of our systems up against that data store to provide that managed information service.
And you've offset that against the likely risks, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Of the delay.
Absolutely. Well, the system we have is fit for purpose. So we're trying to extend its shelf life a little bit longer to give us that breathing space to put this new managed information service in place. So it's a question of one of the things I wanted to do was go and look across the water down south, have a look to see what other organisations have done. And I've seen revenue commissioners in the south have done a very similar thing to what LPS is trying to do. Difference is, instead of theorising about it, they went on with it, they got on with it and did it. I think we've theorised and we've kind of stepped back from the brink, maybe because the word you've used is risk. Whenever you step off an old system that you trust and is trusted and tested, you think, I feel very, very comfortable with that. Whenever you start to shift onto something that's new, there's a gulp of oxygen before you jump. And I think we're getting to that stage where the gulp of oxygen is going to be required very soon.
Thanks for that.
Okay, I'll hand over finally then to John McAllister, a very practical and non-theoretical question, in light of what's been said.
Well, I was almost thinking, well, we would all love your IT system maybe to drop our own addresses off the system. My IT isn't quite working this morning, so apologise, but it was around the targets about implementing the opportunities for improvement for strategic asset of the rate collection and recovery. That's on a green status, but it's looking at some of the review and the reports done by Ernst & Young and associate work remaining to do, and that many timescales that you would think appropriate.
Well, some of that work was coming off what Mervyn was speaking about earlier, about customer segmentation,
yes.
propensity to pay. That's the Ruddy and Train.
It's all also the new payment channels that Colin alluded to in terms of making it easier for people to pay, the use of text messages, the ongoing case cleaning. So a significant amount of what Ernst & Young recommended has either been implemented or certainly is well on course. I don't think there's anything that they recommended that we haven't started.
No, I don't think so.
From memory. And to be fair, you know, some of it we were doing already, but there's no doubt it did give an impetus, and certainly there was a lot of good stuff which really they have brought from the private sector and utilities and whatnot that we can use. So it is very much work in progress, and certainly most of that will be implemented certainly into the new year. But quite a bit is already there. The new payment channels are already there. Certainly they will get their the first full test in the next week or two when the new bills go out. But certainly there's now a facility where people can pay a bill over the phone without speaking to an operator. And the online facility has been greatly enhanced as well to make it more like Amazon as opposed to an old-fashioned system which was a bit clunky up until now, but certainly the early testing and we have used them in the last week or so, they seem to be working very well, and it's all about offering people the widest range that they can use to pay.
And I mean, with the evidence, that would mean the old point is that makes it significantly easier for customers to balance cash flow and manage their own while recognising have to contribute to.
Yeah, and I think, you know, certainly in terms of looking back at the whole customer segmentation aspect, you know, the people we do not have to worry about is the person who gets their bill and at the 31st of March the following year, over the last 5-6 years, it's paid. You know, and certainly that is. You know, the people we need to focus on are those who break payment arrangements and don't honour the commitments that they've made. Now, some of that will be because they're in financial difficulties, and then those are the people that we'll try to work with in terms of payment arrangements, etc. But ultimately, if people don't work with us, well, then we'll progress to court.
Mm-hmm. The other one just on the very much in the red status was the sick days for employees. It's because your target was less than 7.7 days. But I mean, where are you on that, or how do you propose to change?
Well, we're looking at an outturn at this stage of over 9 days at the end of the year, which isn't what I'd like to be sitting here telling you, but that's where it is. I've been working in enough large organisations in my time in the civil service, particularly large processing organisations, to understand some of the dynamics you get. I worked in the SSA and I worked in employment service in Dell. And when you're dealing with very large volumes of staff, where staff are dealing with difficult frontline jobs, their staff particularly at AA, AO, EO2 grades, your levels of attendance issues are always higher. That's not an excuse. I think there's a factor in there in terms of I suppose why when people go off sick they maybe spend a bit longer off than maybe if you were at a higher grade in an organisation and maybe feeling a bit more in tune with what you do every day and a bit more in control of what you do every day. There's been lots of studies done as to why that's the case, but I think in terms of how we sit within DFP with the number of staff we have out sick and the number of days, we're pressing very hard on it. I make it a constant issue to talk to managers about and make sure managers talk to staff about it. We do our best to get staff back to work quickly. We do our best to comply with all of the mechanics of the system that we possibly can do. We do as much prevention work as possible as well to make sure that staff know all the facilities out there in terms of welfare and care call, whatever else is there to help them, that we can use that. Despite all of that, it's still very, very difficult. It's an extremely challenging target to meet. One that we'll keep pushing at. So it's not a matter of white flag at this stage of the year and say, well, that's gone. We will keep striving continuously at that to make it the best we can. But it is a tough challenge, particularly given the composition and the profile of the staff that we do have and the nature of all the work that they do. And when you look at comparator organisations, as say like the Employment Service or like SSA or all the parts of DSD, you'll see the same sets of core issues that are there that need to be addressed.
What can you get it? I mean, from a time perspective and setting in maybe a very challenging target with the makeup and say the demographic of your workforce. Is this achievable at some point, or is it going to languish about that if you're saying it's going to be in around the 9 days?
We'll be in a better position to answer that in 12 months' time. I think we need to. I would like to see how we drive that over the. I've had 6 months with them.
Yeah.
I'd like to have another 12 months at this. And if I was sitting this time next year and you'd be asking me that same question, I'd be in a really strong position to say, yeah, I think we pulled all the levers here that we can. But until things change from a policy point of view, I think where you have very large cohorts of staff in that sort of business, I think you're going to always have that sort of issue.
And know anything you can learn from private sector. I mean, on my first question around, the payment aspects, you've lifted quite a lot from private sector and best practice. And is that something that, or is it just so heavy in administrative posts? That
Well, that's not my gift to change that. You're talking about the policy people in HR who'll have to say, well, look, we're looking at the particular dynamics of your business. This is how you should apply how the HR system works in terms of what you do. It's a one-size-fits-all, effectively. If you're asking what the private sector do, the private sector will be a lot more decisive and a lot more focused, making sure that people come back to work a lot earlier. And you're talking policy issues here, which are outside of my remit entirely. So that would be pretty well documented.
I mean, it was one thing that I suppose a constant thing here is sickness across the Northern Ireland Civil Service. And if you compared that with private sector, it runs into £1 of a cost per year. How do we get individual parts of the civil service effectively to start performing? And that's why I'm certainly happy to note it, and the next time you're back or at
something I think we'll maybe do in the future. I'll just jump in here with one final issue then, just for yourselves, which is obviously one of the major issues we'll be facing, not just yourselves but across the public sector in the next couple of years, will be the voluntary redundancy side of things. And I just wonder, given the fact you've got quite a high percentage of your staff that might be described as, I think are described as high risk in that regard, you're in a situation where you've mentioned about bringing in of staff to try and get a lot of these things sorted out and cleared up in that regard. And obviously, you're like everybody else, you'd be under a level of budget constraints, and the opportunity also is going to be given for staff not to be sort of put on a differential or a wrong, a disadvantaged basis, if you like, with the opportunities that are there for other staff. How are you going to be able to manage all that and then also maintain the same level of service to the frontline customer? It's
a really searching question, very good question, and one that we've been asking ourselves for some time as well. In terms of answering that question, you always look to where your levels of risk are in the business. We have specialist staff on valuation side, mapping side. We have staff on the revs and bends side who've been there for a very long period of time, and their experience levels are such that I would almost deem them as specialists in the sense of how much experience they've clocked up. Similarly, on the registration side, there are particular people who are in posts who've been there a very, very long time. And one of the problems the organisation has is it's kind of locked in around those individuals. You have people who are almost like single point of failure, who almost can't be done without. So one of the strategies we have in place is to make sure that we anticipate, and we do know who's applying for the exit scheme. We anticipate where some of those departures will come. We need to put in place contingency arrangements, if you like, now. Make sure that we have people who are and systems in place, and structures in place to make sure that we're not reliant on a single point of contact or a single point of failure. That's a difficult HR challenge, and it requires you to do quite a bit of scenario planning. So, for example, if we lost a clatter of mappers, field mappers, we could be in a very, very sticky position whereby we would need to take reductions elsewhere in the organisation to try and bring enough people back in to maintain that level of service. There's a high risk that if you lose too many in the one part of the organisation too quickly, that you will certainly take a dip. You're asking me, do I think we'll take that dip? It depends. It just depends how the cards fall. If the cards fall that it does hit one side of the business a lot harder than some of the others, it could be a risk for us. But it's one we'll have, I suppose we have to manage.
Where there's obviously as well, looking at it objectively from outside, where there's a particular risk or concern for yourselves. I mean, compared to almost any other aspect of public service, you're actually in a service where you're essentially bringing in money into government and bringing in income to an extent which is probably relatively unique within the wider sort of civil service or public service in that regard. So obviously that will need to be protected as well.
Well, the other thing I would say is, I mentioned LPS 2020 earlier on. I've got reviews ongoing in a number of parts of the organisation, reviewing evaluation, staffing. We've about to undertake a review of registration. The organisation needs to integrate better. When I talked about single points of failure, the organisation is like 4 or 5 different parts, and those 4 or 5 different parts actually collaborate at different points. I need to build a more integrated function. I need to put the organisation onto a different platform where we have new processes and better managed information. And I think in terms of trying to do that, what I'm trying to be able to do is, as we are going to be required to do what we do with less people, I need to make sure that I'm able to move the right people around to where we need them most. Okay. So we're going to go into a very fluid position, I think, over the next 2 to 3 years, where we work our way through that.
Well, Colin, thank you. This has been a very useful session. You mentioned earlier, and if there's a specific proposal, I'm sure the committee will be happy to look at it, of, at some stage a particular site-specific visit, to see, get a more hands-on. I'm perhaps a little bit conscious of the fact that probably we're not in a great position to lecture you today about absenteeism, given that we're actually sitting here with probably just under half of the committee here. But it's all the star pupils that are in today in that regard. So thank you for that session, folks. I'm going to suggest that our next session, we're obviously sitting more or less at quorum, but our next session is a briefing on the LPS on non-domestic revaluation. But I would suggest maybe we take a 5-minute comfort break at this stage, or else I'll be hassling you through the next session very quickly in that regard. There's DFP and LPS response to some of the issues raised are at pages 14 to 19 of the table pack, into the related press clippings at pages 104 to 105 of the main pack. We welcome back, I suppose, 2 of our old friends, Alan Bronte and Brian McClure. Don't know, maybe you'll be our friends at the end of all of this, but I suppose really just I'll ask you maybe to make brief sort of opening remarks. I appreciate we're obviously running a bit behind. Brian, so
thanks very much, Chair. I'll maybe start off. I understand the committee had quite a powerful evidence session a couple of weeks ago from the convenience store representatives led by the Northern Ireland Independent Retail Traders Association. Anything I say today and anything Alan says today is not trying to diminish the distress felt by these ratepayers and having to pay significantly more rates following the revaluation. We're here to explain, Alan's here to explain what he's done, and I'm also here to explain what the policy is, and also answer questions on transitional relief, small business rate relief, or whatever the committee wants to talk about in terms of the policy thing. But in terms of setting the context for revaluation, revaluation simply takes a snapshot of the real world at a point in time with reference to market rents. As you know, rate bills are currently, that is for this year and previous years, have been based on 2001 rents. And I suppose the first question the committee may well ask, well, why do you use rents? Why don't you use some other kind of measure of economic performance? Well, I suppose it's easy to administer, but the more successful trading locations are, the more rent they can command. So, and not just trading locations, business sectors as well. So there's no surprise, I think, that the revaluation has had certain effects. In terms of the losers out of revaluation, renewable energy is one of them. Pubs in the Cathedral Quarter is another good example. Business parks on the edge of towns, they've done quite well in terms of rental growth, or their relative rental growth since 2001. And of course the larger convenience stores, which is what we're talking about today. These are merely a reflection of the changing commercial landscape since the last snapshot was taken in 2001. So it's been quite a while. I think the Minister mentioned in the regional rate debate that one of the reasons for some of these large increases for some ratepayers is because of the absence of regular revaluations, and they expressed a desire to have revaluations on a much more regular basis, and that's certainly something we in the department have always favoured, but for one reason or another that has not always been possible. So we're going back to 2001, which is the kind of reference point for this revaluation, and if you recall back in 2001, you know, shops were advertising one punt for £1, so that tells you how long it was ago. So there's been quite a transformation in various business sectors, particularly in retail since then. And of course that works both ways. Retail as a whole is down more than 10% in terms of the impact. This reflects the decline in the high street, it reflects the impact of internet trading, it reflects the rationalisation of retailing into large regional centres, you know, the Tesco's and Sainsbury's of this world. So there's a lot has happened in that time. I've listened to some of that session, and I think an expression that was used by Glyn Roberts on frequent occasions was that LPS is clobbering the larger convenience stores. Well, LPS has no discretion in what it does. LPS doesn't decide that one sector should pay more than another. LPS is there to interpret the property market. That's all it has to do. Now, I'm not undermining the difficulty in doing that, but that's what they are charged to do. Its valuers, Allen's valuers, most of whom are chartered surveyors, have to interpret the property market. They're expert in doing that. So it's not a matter of DFP decides that some people aren't paying enough or whatever. The cards will fall where they fall in relation to the evidence that is available to Land and Property Services. There is no incentive there's no incentive for LPS to value one sector higher than the other. It's certainly, and there's certainly no interference from the core department in relation to that. So I think that's worth saying. So why have these convenience stores gone up so much? Well, I mean, I'll let Alan go into some of the detail on that, but it is an extremely competitive convenience market existing today, one that didn't exist back in 2001. So it's really no surprise that some of these stores are paying significantly more. It reflects changing shopping habits after the downturn as well. I think the days of the weekly or fortnightly shop that I had to endure, you know, up at the local Tesco's are a thing of the past. People are shopping in these stores a lot more than they used to. This is there was an article in the Business Telegraph which said that the turnover of the Henderson Group and Musgrave Group combined is 1.25 billion, and that's the size of this market. So I'm not saying that those ratepayers are big business, but as a sector, it's a big business sector that didn't really exist back in 2001 when the last revaluation took place. Also, for that reason, I think the rates that the convenience stores currently pay are very low. So very low current assessments plus a very successful sector, I think, leads to the situation where their assessments are going up significantly. Has LPS got them right? Well, I'd like to think they got most of them right, but they're not infallible. They may not have got them all right. They're dependent on the market evidence that's made available to them. And certainly LPS is very open to looking again and reviewing those valuations, and that process is an entirely free process, and I think we've outlined some of that in the letter that we've in response to the committee's initial queries. I think that's probably all I want to say now. You'll want to talk to me, I think, about transitional relief. You'll want to talk to me about small business rate relief.
Brian, just to pick up. Sorry,
I'm probably better answering questions on that than talking about it.
Okay, maybe just to suppose on that point. I mean, I think everybody can appreciate that. First of all, whenever you have a revaluation, and I think it's been highlighted by the Minister that whenever you revaluation, particularly with quite a gap, I suppose the one complication is you then see at times either sort of big increases or big reductions. And I think there's a good point made in terms of the sense of that being sort of more regular. And I suppose the other, related to that, understandably, we're in a situation where essentially the cake is the same size, but it's getting carved differently. I suppose where people have seen tougher economic circumstances, you know, then sometimes they don't see the logic in a situation, perhaps understandably, where across the board, if it's tougher, that doesn't necessarily mean that they benefit in that regard. But I suppose, particularly given the length of time, you mentioned about transitional situation, and I think that given that the nature of rates will always be almost sort of it'll be 2D, it'll be an isolated photograph of a frozen moment in time compared on that basis, and that inevitably means that various businesses have got to move from A to B in terms of what they're paying. I suppose the two issues that then arise out of that is what provision, indeed, what thoughts given then to some form of transitional relief, so that where there is a large increase, that there's some level of phasing within that. And I suppose the second issue, from a practical point of view, leaving aside whether there's any strict phasing side of it, where businesses have got significant increases, what help can LPS be in terms of providing some flexibility, i.e. making some level of arrangement for tailored payment arrangements, because obviously it wouldn't be a particular benefit if we reach a situation that because of a leap overnight, you then have a business essentially takes a view of, well, I can't afford, particularly from a cash flow point of view, to pay that. I'm going to go bust, or I'm going to lay off staff simply to try and meet ends. That's not helping anybody either. So I wonder if you could respond just on those two issues of the consideration of any form of phasing where there's large increase, and any, leaving aside, if you like, the amount that's being paid, any tailoring of arrangements as regards how open you are to that with businesses.
Big questions. I suppose I'll start off by saying that as a department we are required to bring in revenue of 650 million through the regional rate, both domestic and non-domestic. So that kind of what drives us. In terms of relief schemes, the Executive has already agreed up to 30 million for the rates convergence and 20 million for small business rate relief. We don't have any budget at the moment to deliver on a small business rate relief scheme. So there's a very real issue of affordability. But of course then there's the policy considerations as well. And before I came up to the committee, I just thought I'd look at what happened the last time we had a revaluation, and I'm going to read from a note, I think it's a note I drafted at the time, which was in relation to the retail warehouses were the big losers at the last revaluation, where they were paying up, many paying 50% more, but quite a few paying 100% more following the revaluation. And in relation to the transitional relief thing, and I'm going to quote this: arguments could be mounted to justify transitional relief. However, such an arrangement at this end of the market, that is the retail warehouses, would have to be funded by other ratepayers. In other words, those who will benefit through revaluation, that is sectors that have not fared so well in recent years, would have those benefits phased in to allow deferment of increases for others. This would undermine the fairness of the revaluation process and add complexity to the system. So what that's really saying is that if you're to have an affordable transitional relief scheme, you're probably going to have to, those that have benefited through the revaluation, that is many high streets, Donegal Place in Belfast, and various other parts of Belfast, various other parts of Northern Ireland, in fact, various parts of Derry, Londonderry, Strabane, everywhere that has benefited through lower rates would not experience experience those benefits as quickly. And that is the way the transition schemes have operated in England, Wales and Scotland in the past. We have never had a transitional relief scheme for our non-domestic revaluations, except for the very lowest value properties. And since then, of course, we've had small business rate relief. And the Executive has agreed to extend small business rate relief for at least another year, despite the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy's policy evaluation, which said there was really no full economic rationale for that post-downturn to continue with that. It has been decided to fund that to the tune of 20 million next year because of the revaluation and not wanting to cause any further effect on those particularly smaller businesses that may well be affected. So that's kind of, it's maybe in a roundabout way, I'm trying to answer your question.
On the other issue of, shall we say, the practical arrangements, if you've got a situation where if businesses, in terms of looking at a bit of flexibility in the way that they, whatever arrangements they paying off the rates, is there a sympathetic ear potentially to that, which I appreciate a policy issue? Or practical sort of outworking of it?
Well, I mean, I listened to Mervyn Adair talking in the last session about payment arrangements and, come and talk to LPS and where you have difficulty paying, and I imagine that would extend to this particular category of ratepayer. But, I'm on the policy side of things. Maybe Alan's better placed to...
Well, the first thing to say is that any business will put into payment on a 10-monthly basis. So there's no one forcing anybody to pay the entire bill on the 1st of April or early May, and so that payments can be put into place on a 10-monthly basis, and that's important. I think we need to anchor some of what has been said in the past around significant increases. The percentages are very misleading. And I think we need to anchor some of this in the reality of the sort of businesses that we've been talking about. And in no way am I, taking away from the increases that are being faced. Not that far away from here, the nearest Tesco's, I presume, to this building is at Knocknagonie. That Tesco's has a bill of £1 million. Many of the supermarkets in Northern Ireland will be facing bills of over £500,000, right up to £750,000. This sector of the market is not the large out-of-town supermarket, but they are very popular locations for shopping, as Brian has said earlier. And I think we just need to anchor some of the things that we're saying in the reality of the £650 million that has to be brought in. So the increases are percentage-wise are large. However, when you actually look at the amount of money, if I look at if I look at the 7 sites that were brought to us earlier in the discussion, the range of the bill was from sort of 6,000 up to 18,000 for those properties. The range now, the lower property is less, and it will go up to about £23,500. So percentages have been very emotive. I think we need to sort of stand back a little bit and look at what the actual bills are. Those are now available on the website, and so very open for everyone to see. But business rates are difficult for everyone, and in LPS we certainly would look where someone is, clearly there is a real hardship issue and we're looking business failure in the face. Then I think colleagues will look and talk. And it's better to talk than to, at that stage, than to let people get into trouble. Okay,
open it up now to questions. John?
Certainly, right, Brian, was a very, very powerful presentation from led by Nerda, but some of the business owners. Essentially, you're saying that's just several combination of things, I suppose. Low rates historically, moving to a very successful business model that has tapped into modern life effectively, and coupled throw in with that 13 or 14 years of a time gap has led to, like for some of these guys we're talking, I know you weren't trying to move away from percentages, but going from memory of the presentation, they were talking about like 70% rises in valuations. These businesses are all finding that not only a huge bill, but they've invested heavily in delivering that very successful model, and at this point feel pretty well almost that having invested and maybe taking on a fair amount of level of debt to invest and build up a successful business. Suddenly they're getting absolutely thumped by government effectively to pay more rates. I mean, on the chair's point, Ryan, effectively you're telling us there's very little you can do round. You can work with somebody in crisis, but as regards looking at payments or phased payments, you can't extend much difference than what's already in place.
Well, phased payments is maybe the step before that LPS could take, but in terms of any sort of policy intervention, like transitional relief or something like that, DFP, we have no budget for that, and anything we did would have to go back to the executive, I think, because DFP as a department are charged to bring in 650 million for every department. Now, if we're going to have to fund an expensive transition relief scheme, something's got to give. So where do you cut? At the moment, it's such a tight, it's the tightest budget I have ever known in all the years I've worked on DFP. And there's simply no room to manoeuvre on it. The executive has agreed up to £30 million for a transitional relief scheme to manage rates convergence. Now, that's a 4-year scheme, but next year's spend is 15 million because it's front-loaded. And next year's spend on small business rate relief is 20 million. So these are not insignificant sums. If you then put on top of that a transitional relief scheme for particular businesses, that's going to add a burden. Where's the money? I struggle to think where it is now. Clearly, it's not for officials to make decisions. It's for politicians to make decisions as to what is a priority here. But as a department, we don't have a budget for it, and I suppose we don't have a case for doing it at the moment.
You may not if welfare reform goes well. You mightn't have a budget either.
Yeah.
A cheerful note. Anybody have the other questions? I have one other I want to touch on.
Yeah, just an interesting one, Brian, I picked up that in the defence on the non-domestic revaluation lists, the CLPS has recruited additional staff on a permanent and fixed-term contract basis to manage the appeal process. I thought there was a freeze on recruitment. Just wondering about additional staff on a permanent and fixed contract basis.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, and in fact, on the valuation side, the numbers of staff have reduced over the last couple of years. We haven't been filling posts, and even during the revaluation, at one stage, we were covering our posts with about 50 casual staff. A business case was put through the Permanent Secretary to the Minister, and indeed, that would have probably been in around the September-October period, and the Minister would have agreed to that. However, since the moratorium and the really budget difficulties now, where we would have filled entirely with the permanent staff, we're now going to take a proportion of the staff on a fixed contract basis, and I think that's probably a wise thing to do. We certainly do need staff there to be able to deal with the challenges that we're well aware that will come our way, and it's important that we have the right staff to deal with that. But we're not going to be flush with staff.
No, obviously I think that's a certain amount of wisdom, but you have recruited new permanent staff.
Yes, they are non-qualified staff, and some of those staff will no doubt come up through the ranks maybe at some stage, but we will be reorganising, as Colm said earlier, to try to put the best people in the best places to deal with whatever comes our way. But yes, it's certainly needing staff in you know, for a property will need to be check the survey of it and issues like that. So, you know, we can do that with an unqualified member of staff, and the valuer can check out the actual valuation details. So there's ways and means in which we're going to do our best to provide as good a service as we can. But yes, those staff, some of them have arrived, and others we expect.
I'll then to follow up Leslie's question. When you're talking about the appeals side of things on the non-domestic side, I mean, the volume will be an awful lot less than whenever you have domestic revaluation, just the nature of the beast. But are you reasonably confident then that you've got sufficient staff and resources in place that, in terms of appeals mechanism, you can deal with that efficiently and effectively?
Difficult, Chair, to answer that, because the crystal ball isn't always accurate. You know, it's the number of challenges we'll get. We've been maybe disappointed in a way that we haven't had more people contact us since we put the evaluation list out on the web on the 13th of November. We've given you the figures on that. I would have expected more. Now, whether they're all keeping their powder dry or whether there are not going to be as many as perhaps we thought. In 1997, there were about 11 to 12% of people challenged it. In the first period, in 2003, it was about 6%. Now, I would expect to be higher than both of those figures. But at this stage,
so far they haven't. I mean, you would have thought to some extent that if you were in a business where you were getting notified of what was going to be a reasonable sort of rates increase, that there'd be a likelihood that you would move fairly quickly to challenge. That doesn't appear to have been the case in most cases. Whether some people are waiting until the bill comes through the door.
I think that's the issue. You know, the early publication, we thought that would give us some sort of signal as to what the degree of acceptance of this valuation list will be. It really hasn't, because of the very low numbers. I think people stall until the bill hits the mat, and then they go ballistic. You know, and we could find ourselves in the middle of April saying, well, that wasn't too bad, but I suspect it will be significantly worse than any previous revaluation that we've had before. And you know, I've been in front of this committee a number of times trying to curb everybody's enthusiasm on this revaluation, to say, you know, this is the most difficult ever. And you know, for everybody that's going to win, there's going to be someone that's going to lose out of this revaluation. And given the length of time, as you've said, Chair, since the last one, it has exaggerated the effect. And I've also said in front of this committee that this is the one policy issue that almost causes me to lose sleep. You know, we deal with welfare reform in relation to rate rebate, we deal with small business rate relief policy, we deal with the whole rates convergence, but dealt with a whole range of policies this year. This is the one that is difficult to control.
Sorry, just the other one, just to clarify as well, that applications and appeals are still coming in as we speak on the existing list, and will do so up to the 31st of March. So we started the 1st of April with already a workload of challenges and appeals against the existing list, which still have to be cleared. And so we won't be rushing in on the 1st of April as the first challenge comes in to deal with that. We can't. Otherwise, we would leave behind all the challenges on the existing list. And there is sometimes quite a party piece by some people by putting in a number of challenges on the 31st of March, just to sort of safeguard their position. So there is a workload there. So, you know, we don't expect to be, we will use the first month or two to actually assess what's coming in, where it's coming in, the type of properties that are coming in, so that we deal with things in an organised way and not just in the order in which they come in. That'll be important.
Gaila?
Thank you, Chair. It's more a comment than a question. And as you said, Brian, we did say at the outset that there would be a lot of winners and losers in this, and I suppose what we're seeing now is the fallout of the losers and in terms of the hardship issues that they're facing. And we heard that when the presentation was given to the committee from the retailers. I suppose what came out of that to me was and you've addressed it in your correspondence to us, was the lack of transparency, no breakdown for the criteria used to increase the rateable value. But you have in your correspondence to us addressed that the retailers will be afforded the opportunity to discuss their individual valuations with LPS. But I suppose, I mean, you know, not wanting to put sugar over salt. I suppose the confidence now has to be put back into the sector, and will this be done through the appeals mechanism in terms of, you know, if people do present, then that's, I suppose, not a piecemeal, but the way to get the confidence back into the sector again, that how robust you will be dealing with those appeals?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is that for many people this is not a surprise. Some retailers have thought it was a surprise. We did ask every single non-domestic property in Northern Ireland to return to us details of their rent. Now, some of them will be owner-occupied, so they don't have a rent to return. In terms of petrol filling stations, we have asked them for the throughput, the number of litres. And so for many businesses and for other businesses like pubs, again, returns went out and they will have returned. So for many of them, it's not a surprise, and many of them will have been prepared. Certainly in terms of individuals, when we get into details with the discussion, we will be absolutely open as to how we've assessed the value of the convenience store, the petrol station or whatever. We will agree the survey, we'll resurvey the physical environment. We will, again, check out the throughput. We'll look at the number of pumps that are at a petrol station. We'll check all the details, and we'll be very open with the individual. We can be reasonably open, if we've said in the note, in terms of the general rental in the area. And again, that shouldn't be a surprise. Some of these convenience stores are rented. We didn't put, this is evidence-based revaluation. And so we have a lot of rental evidence in the convenience market sector, as we have in the other sectors. So we will be very open, and the operators were open with you. But you know, a £5 million investment in a range of stores, looking to another £5 million of investment. I think the rental assessments are reasonable, given the scale of investment in some of these particular premises, and given the sort of figures that Brian has said earlier. But it's based on evidence, and I say, we will be open, we will agree the details with each individual person that puts in an application, and they don't need to, as we said in our note, appoint an agent. We're happy to work with their agent if they appoint one, but we're very happy to deal with an individual, and we'll have local valuers dealing with local people.
Just picking that last point up, one of the things, Alan, came out from information supplied to us was it looked as if people were going the appeal route, a formal tribunal. There's no need to do that.
That's right. There are two stages. After a revaluation, there's two stages. The first stage is to make an application to the district valuer. And once the district valuer has reached this decision, if someone is not content with that, then they can appeal to the commissioner evaluation. If they're not content with the commissioner's decision, then they can move to the Lands Tribunal for Northern Ireland. And in none of those forums does anyone need to be professionally represented. You could go to the Lands Tribunal and represent your own case. Some people might choose that stage to bring in an agent at any stage, but no, those are the stages of the process, and you know, that has worked in the past, and there's no difficult confidence that it will work now in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I attended a public meeting arranged by Northern Ireland Independent Retail Traders Association. When was it, last month or January? And petrol retailers were there, and arguments were put forward that they, in many cases, represented special purchasers, because you've got the Musgrave Group retailers and you've got the Henderson Group retailers all trying to get market share, and therefore they've almost got involved in the Dutch auction, which is artificially inflated rents. Now, we as a department would maintain, well, that is the market. But that is an argument that they could put forward in a test case if they wanted to through the Lands Tribunal if necessary, and get that issue dealt with you know, quickly and economically, because if it's dealt with almost like a class action to deal with that point of principle. But in terms of individual retailers taking, there's nothing to prevent an individual retailer be able to say, well, my shop's too high in comparison to that shop, and my shop only rents for such and such, and yet you've assessed my rates at such and such. Why is that? So all of those arguments can be mounted without professional representation.
Once upon a time, the valuation lists were available in the local council offices. Is that still the case?
They're available online.
Yeah. They're all on the internet.
It's all on the internet. I mean, if we can, any of us can, go in online at any place and look it up. And at the minute, you can look it up and find the liability for last year or for this current year and the liability in the forward year. So all of that is available.
For purposes, if you have a garage, Joe Blogs, next to you has got a garage, what he's like.
Yeah.
You can see what his.
Everybody can see everybody else's valuation.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to have more of the physical, the survey details online, and that's something where we will move to at some stage. But there's a lot of work in tidying up the information so it does, it comes across in a very structured way online. But again, individuals can look at our survey and we can discuss that and check it out. So yeah, I mean, it's as open as I can hopefully make it.
Maybe the old lists were a better way of doing it.
Well, the list was out of date as soon as you printed it.
Yeah.
It was out of date before you got it on the shelf.
Minor though, weren't they?
No, there was many. I mean, don't forget 40,000 changes a year that we will do to evaluation list because you're adding in properties, taking out properties. So it's always moving, and our lists are now updated over. It's completely live. So we make a change, it's live on the internet.
But the previous system for the paper list would inhibit a ratepayer from easily forming a view as to whether he's too high in comparison to his neighbour. Now you can do it from your own home and check out the valuation and do it that way.
Yeah, and print it off in a form. In a form like that, so everybody can actually go on and then print it off in a PDF and provide that to an individual or to their, for example, an agent will be able to download it into a PDF and send it to their company wherever it is. So we've tried to make it very open and very accessible now. But I presume if someone goes into a council office or in any of our frontline customer information centres, they will be able to use the internet if they don't have access to it. We'll be very pleased to guide people through that and look at it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, folks. Well, Brian, we thank you for the session today. I suspect this may be an issue we'll be coming back to at various stages, and would ask you, I suppose, if there's any further information that we require.
I mean, we realise it's a very difficult issue, this, and we're certainly not complacent about it. And we've tried to explain today, but that still doesn't diminish the fact that people are facing substantial. These are local businesses. They're not particularly small businesses, but they're local businesses, and they are important to the Northern Ireland economy. We fully appreciate that, but we're completely, in terms of the process, we're completely blind as to who's worthy and who's not worthy. It's in relation to, it all goes back to the market evidence.
But I think the other important thing is that, and not taking away from that, but on the flip side of that, there are many properties in Northern Ireland that will now be let because the rates equation is now put back in a proper balanced way. There are deals being made in Donegal Place and downtown Belfast that would not have been made had we not have carried through this revaluation.
I think Paul has a very brief final.
It's just on the point of the revaluation. I appreciate the time factor between the last non-domestic and this has probably added to the problem. But the difficulty that I have and perceive it on a day and daily basis, where the people were demanding a reevaluation. Appreciate that it's fraught with all sorts of difficulties. Everybody thought there were going to be a winner out of this. And yes, there were some areas that are benefited. And if you look at the list of where the complaints have come from, I know some town centres have benefited because they have had a reduction. But likewise, it's how fairly we have attempted to receive the money. And it was petrol stations were the ones who brought the biggest gripe. Yeah. And to me,
Okay, I suppose because we're a wee bit tight for time, we'll take that really just as a comment. Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen. But just put to the committee, obviously this was an issue particularly Nearta had brought to us in an evidence session. Can I get the committee's agreement that the DFP response, which is at table 14 of your table papers, that could be copied to Nearta to show, apart from else, that the committee has followed up the issue. And also as part of that, I think that in any copying of that, we can refer them as well to the Hansard of today's session, obviously, for their information. Members agreeable with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Turn then briefly then to the other items on the agenda. Next item is at 7, there's a statutory rule on the rates, small business hereditament relief amendment regulations. There's an explanatory memorandum at pages 105 to 109 of your packs. The statutory rule has been laid in the Business Office by DFP for formal consideration by the committee, and it's subject to negative resolution expiring on the 31st of March 2015. The committee was briefed on the 4th of March by DFP officials on the initial proposal for subordinate legislation, and members were content. The Department has confirmed there's no changes to the overall policy since those initial proposals, and indeed the Examiner's Statutory Rules was published on the 13th of March 2015. It's included at pages 21 to 25 in the table pack, and the Examiner has confirmed he's raising no points of the rule by way of technical scrutiny. So just put it formally then to, if members are content, that the committee has considered SR 2015/123, the rates Small Business Harassment Relief Amendment Regulations, and there's no objection to the rule. Members content? Okay. Then there's another statutory rule then, which is Statutory Rule 2015/141, the Superannuation District Council's Order Northern Ireland 2015. It had been intended to formally consider this rule and the accompanying explanatory memorandum at pages 111 to 123. However, they've been informed that the Examiner's Statutory Rules identified an issue with the rule arising from its technical scrutiny, which is liaising with the DFP. I would suggest in light of this that formal consideration be rescheduled to a date whenever the Examiner's reported on this matter. That may possibly be next week. And if there's sufficient time in this regard, because the statute rule doesn't apply or doesn't expire until the 28th of April, so it will be after Easter anyway. Are members content that we don't then?
The only thing is, Chair, how's that going to be implemented from the 1st of April?
Chair, in terms of it won't affect the implementation, but in terms of if the committee had objections and wanted to pray against it, it would still have time to do so. You know, so
because it's also subject, I think, to negative resolution in that regard. Okay. Correspondence. I just asked the clerk to take us through any items of correspondence.
Just pick out a couple of items, Chair. The Minister has responded at page 125 of the pack to the issue of the Memorandum of Understanding in the budget process, so he's content for his officials to re-engage with the committee and to further develop the MOU, so I'll contact the officials and work with them on that. There's also correspondence from CIPFA, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. It's a submission on the committee's review of the Barnett formula. So the CIPFA are interested in speaking to their paper for providing an oral briefing if the committee wished to take that. It'd be shortly after Easter recess, and then I think that would tie up the oral evidence on the review, and then they will prepare a draft review paper for the committee's consideration. Then finally, there's the Roundtable on Measuring Wellbeing in Northern Ireland have published their report. There's which is at the pack, page 138, and there is I think a briefing scheduled with DFP in a few weeks' time on that. And if members are content, some of the representatives from Carnegie Trust could also be involved in as a panel.
Members on those issues happy with the suggested actions? Okay, the rest of the items I think it corresponds to note. Item 9, which is the committee work programme, refer members to the draft work programme, which I suppose is in two parts, the up to the Easter recess and then post the Easter recess between the two of them, between pages 164 and 172. Just, I suppose, remind members of one particular issue that is coming up a little bit in the distance, which is the stakeholder event on bank branch closures. It's an issue that's been live for all of us in various forms. There'll be a stakeholder event on bank closures. It's going to take place in the afternoon of Tuesday, the 26th of May. Obviously, it'll be a sitting day of the Assembly. But and I refer members to the recently published Northern Ireland Affairs Committee report into banking inquiry here, which is at pages 28 to 77 of the table pack. I suppose in preparation for that, seek agreement then the Commission, from the committee's point of view, to commission Assembly research to provide support for the stakeholder event in terms of a research paper on the outputs, which would also ask as a useful source document for the committee to undertake the subsequent monitoring work of any steering group established as a result of the stakeholder event. Are members content with that as a way of action? Anything else anybody wants to raise out of the committee work programme? If not, in terms of AOB, we have no AOB from from the table, the chair here. Does any members have any other business they wish to raise? Okay, folks, and then just advise you then that the next meeting of the FP Committee will take place here next Wednesday at 10 a.m. in room 30, Parliament Buildings. Members content with that?
Yep.
So then, members, put the question to the committee adjourn. Read to adjourn.
Assembly Committee Room 30.